I know I shouldn't, but I really want to meet Doug Bradley. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror and then pick 3 movies from that subgenre to discuss. Today's subgenre is Clive Barker horror movies. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Clive Barker is a British horror writer, and he got his prominence probably in the 80s. He was seen as the heir apparent to Stephen King, who you probably are familiar with. And even Stephen King himself said that Clive Barker was the future of horror. And teenage Professor Victor bought into this, really got into Clive Barker for a minute, really was excited about the work that he was going to be doing. And Clive Barker is a challenging read. For those of you that aren't familiar with his work, it's a lot more adult than say Stephen King might be. Actually, he's known for his themes of sex and pain and death and faith or religion, and all intertwined together to make something very taboo feeling and sexy and scary and maybe a little bit gross. His work is definitely more allegorical and literary, if you will, than Stephen King. And feel free to debate me on this in the comments below. But in my mind, Stephen King is a little bit more pulpy. He's a little bit more accessible. Like, you can read a King book, and for the most part, click with it, identify with it. You can understand the themes or, the story where it's at. I actually think that Barker's work is much more thematic, much more allegorical, much deeper, much more fantastical and imaginative. That's the thing that I think I struggled with when I was a teenager trying to read Clive Barker's work, is that it's very it requires a lot of imagination. He's describing fantastical, bizarre, hellish things that we've never seen before. And it's a little hard to wrap your head around that. Whereas Stephen King's talking about a writer getting into some sort of supernatural adventures in Maine. No disrespect to Stephen King. I think his work is fun, but a lot of the times he's not getting too bizarre, whereas Barker's almost always getting really bizarre. And teenage Victor was not prepared for that. I was expecting something a lot more like King, and really didn't know what I was in for. And I think that was why I didn't stick with Barker as much as I wish I had, frankly, because I've gone back and read a couple of things that he's done as an adult now, and I find it much more easy to digest or easy to get into than I did when I was a kid. And so I think maybe Barker is just flat out more adult. His work is more adult. And when you think about the themes he's tackling, themes like sex and religion and death and pain, that makes a lot of sense. And so Barker's one of those things, kind of like jazz. I wish I'd gotten more into it when I was younger so that I could be a little bit more of an authoritative expert on it now. All that is to say, I am no expert on Clive Barker. I do think his work is deep and meaningful. I think it's challenging, it's grotesque, and it's beautiful, and it's quite a trip, man. It's definitely not for everybody. And as a result, he's not been as mainstream as Stephen King, nor have the movies based on his work been as mainstream as Stephen King movies. So that's something else to consider, is that Barker, was poised to be the heir apparent to Stephen King, but A, Stephen King never got off the throne, and B, Barker was just not mainstream enough to do that. And that's to his credit. He never really wanted to compromise his own visions. He more on that in a minute, though. He wanted to do and write about what he wanted to do and write about. And I think that shows in his work, and I think it's what makes his work stand the test of time, frankly. Suffice to say, I'm not exactly the biggest Barker fan, but I have a huge amount of respect for Barker's work and for the artist in particular. And so felt like it warranted discussing the movies based on his work. Even though it's not as prolific as Stephen King, it felt like it needed its own subgenre. And so that's where we are here today, to look at the movies based on Barker's work, because some of them are very, very seminal, important works. Now, as usual, we're going to organize the movie on undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels. And in this case, we're going to talk about them in the order of how defining they are of Clive Barker. Like as they go on, they'll be more increasingly definitive of Clive Barker and his work and his personality and his themes, etc. So with that, uh, let's go ahead and tackle the puzzle that is Clive Barker horror movies. The first Clive Barker horror movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Nightbreed. Nightbreed came out in 1990 and it was a movie that did not live up to its marketing at all and really did not reflect Clive Barker much at all in its original incarnation. But as we'll talk about, it got a little bit more closer to what Clive Barker's original work and original intent was in the future. If you're not familiar with it, Nightbreed is the story of a man named Boone who suffers from mental health issues. He thinks that he is a serial killer because he has these dreams about serial killing, but his psychiatrist is not helping things because his psychiatrist is actually the serial killer trying to convince Boone that he is the one who is guilty of the crimes. All of this changes when Boone discovers a underground city named Midian that is full of monsters known as the Nightbreed. But these monsters are not like monsters you've ever known before. And the story goes into some places where you wouldn't necessarily expect it to go, depending on the version you watch. But we'll stop there because I don't want to spoil the movie for you if you haven't seen it, and you definitely should check it out. Nightbreed was written and directed by Clive Barker, and it was based on his short story Cabal. But just because he was in control doesn't mean that he had true control. Nightbreed is notorious for having studio interference. The producers of the movie really wanted something a little bit more traditional horror. And like I discussed in the intro of this video, Clive Barker is not traditional horror. Clive Barker kind of does his own thing, and it's challenging and unique and strange. And it's not cookie cutter. It's not a Stephen King novel. And so the general consensus is that the producers didn't really understand Nightbreed. They couldn't wrap their heads around the idea where the monster creatures were not the villains in the movie, but actually rather the protagonists of the film. They struggled with that. As a result, the marketing reflected something different than what the movie was supposed to be about. It really tried to portray the monsters as the villains, as monsters, and it really tried to take a slasher film approach. This was the wrong idea. I remember seeing this movie when it came out and being very let down. It did not deliver what I was expecting at all. I was expecting something a little bit more like Clive Barker's previous movie, more on that in a few minutes, and it really didn't deliver what I was expecting it to deliver. And this is not Barker's fault. This is the fault of the producers who kind of took his movie away from him, edited it differently, marketed it very differently, and as a result, we didn't get the story the way it was intended. We got a lot more of the serial killing psychologist played by David Cronenberg, of all people, who is absolutely fantastic. And honestly, I liked the original movie upon repeat viewings because I like the character Dr. Decker a lot more. He is a wonderfully designed character. His mask is absolutely creepy. And if you saw my appearance on Hamburgers and Horror discussing the best horror masks, you saw that we talked about this mask because it is outstandingly creepy. And Cronenberg is fantastic in this role. You know, he's known for directing, but this movie, he's genuinely creepy. So the instincts aren't 100% wrong to focus on him, but it's not the theme of the story at all. And as a result, the original version becomes kind of a mess. Now, you'll note that I said the original version because there are multiple versions of this movie. And without getting into the weeds and the different versions, the thing that you need to know is they finally released a director's cut of the film that had input from Clive Barker on it that is far superior. It's about 40 minutes longer, and it really hews a lot closer to Clive's original work, the short story or the novella Cabal, which I actually haven't read. But it is definitely more reflective of what Clive's original vision was. And fans of the movie really have gravitated to this one as the definitive version of it. So it's the one you should check out. I do think that the original has merit, but mostly as a comparison piece at this point. If you've never seen the movie, check out the director's cut, skip the original, because you're more likely to have a better experience that makes more coherent sense narratively, and you're also getting what the creator originally intended for you to see. The movie is full of imaginative monsters, really showing off Clive Barker's imagination. And they're all done with practical effects, practical makeup, so they look fantastic, and they've aged very well as a result. They're just so interesting and unique and strange and somewhat scary. It's really a wonderful production in that sense. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the Danny Elfman score because that works out really, really well. Clive Barker, maybe not the strongest director in the world, but he's made a good movie here, and it's nice to see that there's a director's cut of it that has shown a little bit more of his true vision because his original vision was so lost after the producers got a hold of it. Now, Nightbreed has continued in comics, and I've read a couple of those, and they're okay. And they keep talking about doing a TV series on it, but to date that hasn't happened. So as of right now, Nightbreed is kind of on its own. It stands alone, and that's okay because it is a really good work. I've turned around on it. I didn't care for it when I first saw it, and every time I've watched it since then, I've liked it more and more to the point where I can say I bona fide like this now. And it does have a tremendous amount of fan support, enough to get the director's cut released years later because there was enough demand for it. So the fans of it are passionate. If you're one of them, let us know in the comments below how you feel about the movie. If you don't like it, also let us know in the comments below. But if you haven't checked out Nightbreed, definitely check it out and then come back and let us know what you think. The second Clive Barker horror movie we're looking at today, the graduate level selection, is Candyman. Candyman, 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 Candyman. Candyman came out in 1992 and is a brilliant movie starring the wonderful Tony Todd. And it really goes into some challenging places, probably more so than Clive Barker's original work ever intended it to go, to its benefit. But we'll get into that. If you haven't seen the movie, it's about a grad student who is doing a thesis on the Chicago projects known as Cabrini Green, a mostly African American community that is run down and crime ridden and full of dangerous and undesirable elements. And she wants to do her report on there, in specific about some of the urban legends that circle or permeate Cabrini Green. In particular, the legend of Candyman, a hooked hand killer who appears if you say his name 5 times into a mirror. Naturally, his name does get said 5 times, he does appear, and hijinks abound as they tend to do. But I'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But if you haven't seen Candyman, please see Candyman. I love Candyman. I am a big fan of the Candyman series, in particular the first movie. It is phenomenal. Now, the movie was written and directed by Bernard Rose, not Clive Barker this time, but it is based on Clive Barker's Books of Blood, a collection of short stories. I think it's called The Forbidden, is the story that this one is based on. And I have read this one, and it's very good. The movie is much bigger than that story and goes into some different places, and again, to its benefit. What Bernard Rose has brought to the story is really what makes it so compelling and interesting and makes it stand out above the normal horror slasher fare. Now, as we've said, and as we'll discuss over and over as a theme in this video, Barker's work is very imaginative. It's not standard horror fare. So already on its own, it's not going to plug into like a standard slasher box. But Bernard Rose gave it another element. He gave it this racial backstory that is rooted in American history that is absolutely fascinating. The idea of Candyman's backstory as an African American artist, a free man born of a slave who dared to have an affair with a white woman, and how he was subsequently lynched, is an incredible backstory and changes the dynamic from any other slasher type monster that you've seen in any other movie. You don't, I mean, maybe Jason Voorhees has some pathos, but not like Candyman. With Candyman, you're really, you have an empathy for him. You feel for him. And that isn't quite as prevalent. It's not missing from the Barker work, but it doesn't hit as well, at least not for me, as the movie does. The movie really works in that. A big part of that is the performance of Tony Todd as Candyman. Tony Todd, we've talked about him before. He's a horror legend, and this is his signature role. And it's a little unfortunate because he's so diverse and good. He can do just about anything. And side note, I actually met him in a convention. I literally bumped into him. And he is like the kindest, nicest, least intimidating guy ever, although he's huge. He's like the complete opposite of Candyman, which is just underscoring how good of an actor he is. But he brings such pathos and such depth to that role. He could have been schlocky and over the top, but instead he brings this mystery and allure and sexiness to the role. You like Candyman, and it's important because you have to understand that Helen, the grad student, who's played by Virginia Madsen, and brilliant job by her, by the way. You can understand why she's drawn to him, why she's both scared and interested in the Candyman. It really works very well. Everything in this movie is coming along well to make it work. The direction is on point, the acting is on point, the writing's on point. Everything comes together wonderfully to make this movie really better than it should be. Like Barker's work is good. Don't get me wrong, that's a great story. But this movie could have just been forgettable, and instead it winds up just leaving this indelible mark on you. It really does hit. It's just a challenging, interesting work, just like Barker's writing, and it makes you think about things in a way that you're not used to thinking about them. The movie was a hit, and it was enough to spawn a series. The other sequels are good, actually. They're not as bad as people would say. They don't touch the original. That's, I think, where the problem comes in. But they are not bad by any stretch of the imagination, or maybe I'm a little biased because I really like this franchise. But I think that all three of them are worth watching. And then there's the reboot, sequel, requel, whatever they're going to call it, that came out recently that is fantastic. It's the Jordan Peele produced one that is done by Ava DuVernay. I think I'm messing that name up, but starring Yahya Abdul-Mateen, and it is fantastic. I absolutely loved the new version of Candyman. I don't want to say too much about it because you should definitely see that too. I don't want to spoil it, I've already spoiled a little bit by calling it not a reboot exactly, but it's a, whatever they're calling it now, the requel. But it's fantastic. It really lives up to the original. But the original's where it's at. I mean, I gotta praise Tony Todd's performance, Virginia Madsen, Casey Lemons. Basically, everything in that movie is working. I don't think there's really a big flaw. I don't really have any complaints about it. It's just a heart wrenching, yet creepy, yet fantastical, and yet poignant movie. Everything just firing on all cylinders. Again, it's the souffle that rises, as I like to say. All the ingredients come together to come up with just a piece of art. I love the original. If you haven't seen it, you got to check it out. And I definitely would check out all the other ones, especially the newest one. You could probably skip 2 and 3, but check out the newest one too. If you haven't seen it, get into this franchise. And if you have seen it, let me know what you think. Am I over effusive about this? I have a special place in my heart for Candyman, so I might be making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be, but I'm pretty effusive about it. If you are too, share it with us in the comments below. And if you've got critiques, let us know about those in the comments below too, because I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. But Candyman gets a high recommend from me. And the last Clive Barker horror movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is, of course, Hellraiser. Hellraiser came out in 1987 and is widely considered to be where Clive Barker really made his mark. This is where he made his first impression. It's not the first movie he did, and it's not the first book, obviously, but it's definitely where people realized that Clive Barker was a thing, or at least definitely was for me. If you're not familiar with it, the movie is about a puzzle box known as the Lament configuration that, when open, can bring you both intense pleasure and intense pain, and cause these otherworldly beings, these demons called the Cenobites. And when a man named Frank finds this puzzle box, he is torn apart, and his mistress winds up having to try to get him back from hell. And that leads to problems for her family, who do not know about her affair. And hijinks abound at that point. And oh man, do they abound. Clive Barker's Hellraiser is a bizarre movie. We'll stop there so not to spoil it for you, but Clive Barker is back again as writer and director for this movie, and this one I think hews a lot closer to what his vision would be. That's why I feel like this is the most Clive-defining movie of the bunch, because it really does reflect his sensibilities, and I think that the world was not prepared for that. Based on Clive's novella, The Hellbound Heart, which again I've read and is absolutely fantastic. That's the one I've reread and thought I absorbed it much better as an adult. This movie is, again, more than that, but it definitely hews pretty close to what's going on in that book, not only in narrative, but also in theme. And that's important because what's going on in Hellraiser is thematically very fascinating. The idea of man's fascination with sex and pain and death and faith, all of the things that are, themes in Barker's work are on display here to wonderful effect. All of the things that are going on here, the idea of the Cenobites, these demons from another dimension that come and torment you because you requested them to. It's a fascinating idea, and the design of these creatures is amazing. Everybody's familiar with Pinhead, the head Cenobite, because it's just such an interesting design with the pins in the face, the bald head, the white skin, played expertly by Doug Bradley. It's a striking image, but this movie's full of striking images. The special effects in this movie, the practical effects, are by and large amazing. No, they don't all completely hold up, but they are so gross, so distressing and disturbing. You feel it. It's a visceral movie, and it really hits. this is kind of why Nightbreed didn't hit for me the first time I watched, is because I was expecting more like this, a whole town of monsters. I was expecting Cenobite level violence and gore, and it just didn't have it in Nightbreed, but it has it in Hellraiser. The attention to detail paid on both the Cenobites themselves and the gore effects really are the centerpiece of the movie. It's what makes it so shocking and noteworthy. But the story itself is fascinating and interesting, and all the actors are holding it down. In particular, Ashley Lawrence as the main girl, she is fantastic in this. And of course, I've already mentioned Doug Bradley, but everybody in this is fantastic. And it's important because the story is interesting, and you kind of have to be with it. It's a little fantastical. Like I said, Barker is an imaginative guy, and it's not the most cut and pat storyline. So you have to be with it, and the actors kind of keep this story somewhat grounded as much as you can for a story like this. I don't want to get into too much particulars about it because I don't want to spoil it for you, because there's some fun twists and turns. But suffice to say, this movie has a lot going on for it, and it is quite the ride. But it's not going to be for everybody. The movie is, like I said, it's really gross. It's got some disturbing sexual connotations in it. It's got, some strange thoughts about faith, religion, things like that. It's perverse. It's a perverse movie in the best possible way. Like I said, this movie became, the calling card for Clive Barker. It's really what put him on the map. There were other movies that came up before. We'll talk about them, but it really is the one that made an impact, and for good reason. This movie kind of hits like a little bit of a bomb when it comes out. People just weren't prepared for something like this. I sure wasn't when I saw this movie. It blew my mind. I absolutely loved Hellraiser when it came out. I still do. It's an absolutely incredible movie. And Barker, like I said, not the greatest director in the world, but he's doing a great job here. It works. The pacing's good. Everything's good here. It looks good. The music is good. It's Christopher Young who did the soundtrack for this one, and it's really good. Everything in this movie works for me. Now, they made sequels, and the sequels are truly diminishing returns. The second one's pretty good. The third one is okay. And then it goes really bad after that. And it becomes basically like a spec script series where people would write a script about a horror movie, and then they would just kind of throw Pinhead into it and make an element of it that was Hellraiser. And here's the thing, as an anthology series, okay, it's kind of fun, but they're not great movies. But I kind of like them anyways. If you're looking for more in-depth detailing of the series, Noah at Hamburgers and Horror has gone through this series in depth, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But he's really kind of done the Lord's work in examining and in reviewing all of the movies in depth. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. But the original is a must see. I know they keep talking about remaking or rebooting the original, and I'm kind of hoping they don't do that, because even though, like I said, a little bit of it feels dated, it still works, man. It's still a really great film, and it really hits for me still. So I hope they don't do that. I hope they don't. I hope they just leave it be. That said, the perpetual sequels aren't really doing anything either. So if there's something interesting to be done with Hellraiser, I'm here for it. I know that they did comic books; those were actually pretty good. But I don't know. Nothing compares to the original. It really is like everything just works for me. That I absolutely adore that movie. And if you haven't seen it, I kind of feel like you have to check it out. Again, I know it's not for everybody, so if it's not your taste, it's not your taste. I'm not going to say you have to see it. I'm not that guy. But man, it really is a quintessential horror movie. It really did usher in an era of, fantastical gore that permeates to this day. I mean, you could argue that Freddy Krueger did that and stuff like that. And I would not disagree with you on that, but Hellraiser is a high watermark for that kind of movie, and I think it remains the high watermark, noteworthy movie for that reason to this day. So if you haven't seen Hellraiser, I would challenge you to check it out. And if you have seen it, and I bet a lot of you have, I'm sure you have thoughts on it. So leave those in the comments below, and we'll continue the discussion. So that's going to do it for our exploration into Clive Barker horror films. But if you like Clive Barker or you like these kind of movies, I've got some extra credit movies for you to check out, and they're worth your time as well. The first one we're going to talk about is Rawhead Rex. And Rawhead Rex came out in 1986 and is based on one of the Books of Blood, one of Clive Barker's short stories. And in this time, he did not direct the movie, but he did write the screenplay of it. If you're not familiar with it, Rawhead Rex is the story of an Irish community that winds up getting terrorized by this mythological monster called Rawhead Rex that is summoned and winds up going on a rampage. And there is a family that gets attacked by it, and the father of the family makes it his mission to try to combat the monster and send it back from where it came from. and hijinks abound as they always do in these kinds of movies. But I won't spoil it for you any more than that, of course. But the movie is it's a campy movie, if I'm being honest with you. I don't love Rawhead Rex, and it's got its fans. It's got a cult following, and I can see maybe why it is. It's not a horrible movie. It's not like a bad time. Like I don't hate watching it. It definitely doesn't deserve the poor reception that it got when it came out, but it also really doesn't deserve the immense amount of love that it seems to get from its fans now. It's honestly somewhere in the middle. It's a low budget movie, and that's really evident when you see Rawhead Rex himself, the monster, is pretty rubbery and cheesy looking, which I gather adds a lot to the charm of it and is part of why people kind of love it or endeared to it. And I get that. I love a good monster movie too. This one is just it's fine. Again, I don't hate it. It's not one I feel like it's a little overrated by the fan base, to be honest with you. It is an interesting idea, but it's not a terribly deep one. You can see that it's a short story being stretched out to feature length, and maybe a little bit all over the map in terms of characters. Like, the motivations of the characters don't really resonate super well. They don't feel super realistic. It's not a great. It doesn't come together. It's no souffle that rises. Let me put it that way. And I know Barker's criticized it. He thinks that the story is solid and that the good director would have made this monster movie a little bit more fun. He ain't wrong on that. The director could have put a little bit more thrills into this, a little bit more money, could have made the monster a little bit more scary and intimidating, but the script could have also been tightened up, Clive. Let's be honest about it. All that's to say that Rawhead Rex is not a bad time. It's not like it's not worth your time at all. Manage your expectations is what I'm saying. If you haven't seen this movie, check it out, but manage your expectations. And if you have seen it, if you love this movie, let us know in the comments below why people should check it out. What about it? Am I not trumpeting? What am I not praising about this movie that should be praised? Let us know in the comments below. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Lord of Illusions. And Lord of Illusions came out in 1995 and is a very imaginative and fun noirish style mystery movie horror film that for me works really, really well, but that might be because it's hitting my sweet spot. If you're not familiar with it, the story is about a cult leader who winds up dying in an attack by former cult members, and they wind up kind of breaking up the cult. But then years later, they're worried about him coming back to life, and they get a private detective on the case to see if they can get him to find the former cult leader and prevent him coming back to life and taking over the world in a nutshell. That's kind of the movie. I don't want to go into spoilers, obviously. And I also find it a little bit hard to explain because the movie's mystery is slightly convoluted, but it still works for me. The movie's main character is Harry D'Amour, who is a private detective and is a recurring character in Barker's works. It comes from the Books of Blood, and this is one of the Books of Blood stories. And he's played by Scott Bakula in this movie, and he works. He kind of feels almost like a time displaced detective. It's definitely a '90s movie, but it has a 1940s detective feel to it to a degree, and that is something that Professor Victor does tend to like. The plot itself is, like I said, it's a little bit hard to follow, and it doesn't completely track the story as well. But that's okay because I think the elements they're adding to it help to flesh it out to a full-length story. Like I said, the movie's plot it's not the easiest to follow. You'll feel okay with that because it's supposed to be a mystery. So when you don't understand or know things, you'll feel like, well, maybe you're not supposed to yet because it's a mystery. And overall, while it doesn't totally come together as a mystery, it does enough that you'll feel somewhat satisfied by it. The ending makes you feel like it paid off, even though if you really nitpick it, kind of didn't. All that to say is I'm having a good time with this movie. I liked this movie when it came out, but I hadn't seen it in a while, and I was going to rewatch it for this video, and I was a little nervous about that because I was afraid it didn't hold up so well. But it does, at least in my opinion. Again, it's very '90s. It's got some datedness to it. Some of the effects are, they're not great. They haven't aged well. But overall, I still find this to be fun. If you are in the right mindset for this, if you can acknowledge that this movie is from 1995 and it was never the deepest movie to begin with, I think you can have a lot of fun with this movie. I was pleasantly surprised when I revisited this how much I still enjoyed it. I do think it's an underrated movie. It's got its fans, but I don't think that it gets as much love as it probably deserves to get. It's It's a fun film. If you like horror mystery, this is one that I think you could definitely sink your teeth into. It's one that I actually consider for the horror mystery subgenre, but I had to put it here because, talking about Clive Barker. So it's one of the more well-known works of his, even though, again, it doesn't get the love it should get. So if you haven't seen it, hopefully I've convinced you to at least give it a shot. If you like detective stories, if you like magic, because there's a lot of magic going on in this movie, if you like the fantastical, and if you like Clive Barker, any of those reasons at all, worth checking out for this one. Are you a fan of Lord of Illusions? Are you one of those people that, like me, just think it's much better than people give it credit for? If so, let us know in the comments below. But if you haven't seen it, please check it out and let me know what you think. And the last Clive Barker extra credit movie we're going to talk about today is Midnight Meat Train. Midnight Meat Train came out in 2008, and it is one of those movies that really kind of came and went. It didn't make a big splash theatrically, commercially, but it really did get fans like a cult following right away, in large part because of the extreme violence in the movie. If you're not familiar with it, the story is about a photographer played by Bradley Cooper who is trying to get like gritty, real photos of the city to have an art exhibit, and he comes across a series of killings in a subway that are really gruesome and violent, and people are going missing, but nobody seems to really believe what is happening. And he's trying to convince people of what's happening by getting photographic evidence of it. And I will stop there. I won't spoil it any further than it is because it goes into some interesting places. But Midnight Meat Train is one of these movies that works for me, sort of. So there is two aspects to this movie. One is the drama surrounding Bradley Cooper and is he going insane, and how people won't believe him, and how his girlfriend doesn't believe him, and he's trying to convince people of these murders that are going on, and the photos that he's got. And then there's the part on the train, which is ultra violent, gruesome, graphic murders happening by Vinnie Jones, the former footballer turned actor who is just such a presence. He really is just frightening in this movie. And then the gore and violence in the movie are extreme. The two things to me don't mesh great. And that might be my own personal bias because I love the stuff on the train. I find the stuff with the photographer to be a bit of a slog. And my bias might be coming in because I'm not a big Bradley Cooper fan. Rocket Raccoon aside, I don't typically like him in performances. I find him to be a little smarmy and unlikable. So when he tries to be everyman or tries to be the protagonist that you're supposed to get behind, I generally don't buy it. I'm not into him. I don't like him. I think he kind of has like resting douche face. So I just don't connect with him. So all the drama surrounding him doesn't hit for me. But the stuff on the train, whenever the movie's on the train, it works for me. It moves. And I think the good outweighs the bad in this movie. I like this movie. I like the way it ends. I won't spoil it for you, of course, but I think it's a fun, interesting kind of a left turn ending that I think works really, really well. But I think all the train stuff is working super well. And if you don't dislike Brad Cooper, then you probably are going to like this movie more than I did if you can handle the violence. Now, the gore is largely CGI. There's a lot of CGI in there, so it doesn't all look as realistic as maybe you would like. It doesn't touch the gore and visceralness of the Hellraiser movies, but it does have some really shocking, crazy gore. So if you like a good kill, if you like a Friday the 13th style slasher type movie, this one's probably going to work for you really well. If you're not into that so much, Midnight Meat Train, you might let that train pass you by. But if you haven't seen it, like I said, I think it's quite the ride. I think the good outweighs the bad. I really like it. And if you can handle the gore, if you can handle the grimness of it, then I think you're in for a good time. And if it's not your bag, it's not your bag. But if you've seen Midnight Meat Train, what do you think? Do you think it's a little bit more balanced than I do? Do you like the Bradley Cooper storyline better than I do? Or do you agree with me? Do you think that maybe more train, less photographer would have been a better recipe? Let me know in the comments below. But Midnight Meat Train overall, I definitely would say I'm into it. But again, enter at your own risk. So that's what I got for you when it comes to Clive Barker. 6 movies that are all worth your time for sure. Some better than others, but all fascinating, interesting things, challenging stuff, not your typical horror fare. And I think that's what Barker brings to the table more than anything. Atypical, interesting, challenging, fresh and original feeling horror. And I'm here for it. I love him for it. And I kind of think I need to go back and read some more Clive Barker. But first, I think it's time for me to read a horror trivia question. As you know, I'd like to end our videos with a little horror trivia to challenge us all, in particular me. I'm going to read it here live on camera. and then I'm going to try to answer it on camera and hopefully not embarrass myself, and I'll give you guys a chance to answer at home. So we're going to look at the gore and disturbing category on the Horror Trivia Pursuit card. And the questions are, or the question is, the movies Shivers from 1975 and The Brood from 1979 were influenced on James Gunn when making what 2006 movie? I am like 99% sure that I know. Hi, buddy. You can help me answer this question? uh, I am almost like I'm almost 100% sure that I know the answer to this question. I am pretty sure that I know this one because I love this movie and I came late to the game and I've done a video on this movie. And when I did the research on it, pretty sure I saw this was listed in it. And I should know it just from the year alone, and I think I do anyways. But and I'm kind of prattling on a little bit to give you guys a chance to formulate your answer as well. Now, Shivers and The Brood, correct me if I'm wrong, both Cronenberg films. I think so. And you know, I Shivers. I know we're going to talk about that in the future. But without getting ahead of myself on that, we're focusing on James Gunn right now. And I've kind of gone on a little while to give you guys a chance to give your answer, but I'm ready to give my answer. So if you got your answer, I can't hear you. I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and give my answer. So hopefully you're ready. My answer is going to be, wow, I stopped for a second there. Slither. Slither. I wanted to say Shivers, and my answer is Slither. Slither, the movie about the worms. Let's just double check, see if I'm right. Slither. It's Slither. That one was like not that hard if you know James Gunn's career. I think that he's gotten big enough now that people are kind of aware of what he's done. You know, ever since he did the Suicide Squad and everything, that got a little more mainstream. People are a little more familiar with his work. I think that maybe a couple years ago when this game came out, this might have been a harder question, but not so much now. And I do love Slither. It's a movie that I came to late in the game. Yeah, I talked about that in the video. So go look at that video if you haven't seen it already. But so did you guys get it right? Did you say Slither? And if you didn't say Slither, what did you say? Did you say the Suicide Squad? You know, what James Gunn movie did you guess? Were you guessing something more Trauma? Because he did start in Trauma. Let me know in the comments below what your wrong answers were. I love to hear them. But thank you very much for hanging out with me as we explored Clive Barker. If you're a Clive Barker fan, I hope you enjoyed this. If you're not a Clive Barker fan, I hope you're becoming a Clive Barker fan. And again, we'll discuss this more in the comments below. Let me know if there's some Clive Barker that I need to revisit, some of his books that I need to check out that I haven't already. I love your recommendations. You guys kill it with your recommendations. I can't appreciate you more. So thank you guys in advance. And until next week when we talk about something entirely different, class dismissed.